Coogs House, there is no other way to put it. Tuesday was full of all kinds of sports law news that will dramatically reshape the future of Houston athletics.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, the daily podcast all about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth, here to break down all things Cougs. And whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater who came to stop by, or maybe you're a Big 12 fan today, who knows. Thank you for making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. Locked On Cougs is proud to be that first listen. If you want to join the conversation but don't know what to say, tell us in the comments down below, wherever you got this podcast, what your last meal would be. I feel like I'd probably have someone ship me in some Lockhart or even Luling City Market barbecue. But I digress. Today's show is brought to you by eBay Motors. More on that in a second. Although I will say, last thing question of the day is yesterday's question of the day was about eating a Kit Kat, and people were confused that there is a wrong way to eat Kit Kat. People just bite into it. That's wrong. All right. Today's show is going to have a couple different things. One, I want to talk about the Jaden Rashada case and how that's unfolding in Florida, but how that will also impact Houston. Speaking of impact Houston, this Big 12 suit, Big 12 officially signs on in a fairly large lawsuit settlement. And I guess that's probably where we have to start because it's probably the most immediate impact. So on Tuesday morning, mid-morning, the news came out officially that the Big 12 was the first Power 5 conference to sign on to the House First NCAA settlement. Now, I say a couple things here. Power 5, because as of the settlement, they are still consoling with the Pac-12, which makes for awkward meetings, I'm sure. But all of the Big 12 presidents unanimously voted to agree to the settlement. And House First the NCAA is an antitrust lawsuit in which you're seeing a lot of big numbers thrown around here. Now, this is going to lead to a couple different changes in college athletics if it all goes through. And with the Big 12 signing on, it does look like it's going to go through. Later on Tuesday, like late into the night on Tuesday, it looks like the ACC also signed up. I think it's interesting and telling, frankly, that the Big 12 and ACC signed onto the settlement before waiting on the Big 10 or SEC. So what we're looking at here is the antitrust aspect of this lawsuit is looking at about $2.8 billion with a B dollars in back pay for damages. Layered into a bunch of different other things. The impact on Houston in the future is you're looking at a compensation model for college athletes coming out of this. Looks like they're looking like $22 million is what they're configuring from the schools to be spent in agreement with Title IX and different things in a revenue sharing model with college athletes and the universities. Completely overhauls scholarships, roster structures, and everything. And again, the Big 12 presidents of Big 12 universities unanimously voted to do this. Now, one common question on Twitter from folks that are still trying to figure this out is like, why would they unanimously decide to do that? What's the thought behind that? And simply put, the settlement has lengthy stretches for these back pay payouts and those kinds of things, where if they took it to court, the payout money may not be exactly the same, but it probably also would have a much shorter window to pay things back on. So that's the give and take of this. On the whole, though, what you're looking at here is essentially in the House versus NCAA case, the argument that Group of Five football and Power Five football, like Power Five athletics, is not the same ball game as amateurism. It's just not. And declaring it as amateurism has, to this point, forced the hand of the athletes and forced them into an unfair agreement with the colleges and universities. I want to talk to them in the second segment about how this particularly ties to Houston. So if you're like, Parker's rambling here for a second, bear with me. It's legalese and things like that. But on the whole, What you've got here is the 2.8 billion in back pay being kind of split up into two halves. 1.6 billion would come from reductions in NCAA distributions spread out over 10 years. Roughly 40% of that 1.6 goes to Power Five institutions. Again, we're still using the phrase Power Five for this standpoint. And then the other 68, the other there are only 68 Power Five schools. The other 200 plus are going to be splitting the other 60% of that 1.6 billion. Division 2 and 3 schools are not expected to be impacted. Division 3 is now a scholarships division, and so that could shape things up as well. Not athletic scholarship division. The remaining 1.2 billion is going to be spent on things like budget cuts in the NCAA and things like that too. All of that gigantic number, 2.8 billion, it's really just one part of this. The interesting thing is a lot of people are speculating based on language in the suit that you could see booster-led NIL collectives dramatically change, if not completely go away, because of the pay-for-play aspect coming now from the universities. It's going to create a whole bunch of other new enforcement rules, laws, and structures on those NIL collectives. And so it's going to kind of, at the very least, reshape all of the different things that those can and cannot do, because so much of what they could have done in the past, I guess in the present tense right now will fall under payments from the university. Right. And so that's a big key to how these things are being shifted around. The school's not going to be more involved in paying people directly. That comes up in the Rashada case later, actually, when we talk about too. On the Big 12 as a whole, before we get into Houston specific stuff in the second segment, this is a good thing. This is the future of college athletics. This is the continuation of the Pandora's box once those big TV deals got signed in the late 80s. This is the continuation of the growth of the sports. This is the continuation of NIL collectors from the start. This is the continuation of the Ed O'Bannon case. This is the continuation of this never-ending snowball, right? And the Big 12, I think, at least symbolically, being the first conference to sign on to this is important, right? I mean, Houston and a handful of other expansion schools came into the Big 12 and kind of saved the day when people thought it was going to fall by the wayside. Now we're talking about them being at the forefront of the future of college sports. That window is all of 3 years, right? And I think that speaks to Brett Yormark and his leadership. I also speaks to the forward thinking the conference has adapted because of that leadership, right? The Big 12 schools are ready for this. It's going to take some dramatic changes for Houston, which we'll talk about in the second segment. But I think the Big 12 schools understand that this is the direction we're going. Let's just start it, right? Let's not worry about who's on first and how long we can drag this out for, et cetera. And so I think that this reads as good for the Big 12 as I read it. I would certainly rather be first than last. I imagine what you're going to see is the SEC sign this thing last as far as the Power Five goes, if not the Pac-12, because of the awkwardness of that conference right now. The SEC, though, I think I would predict to sign this thing last because the current model is working the best for them, right? As far as the conference dollars being brought in. So I want to talk specifically about how this ties to Houston. This is a Houston show after all. Big 12 is just the conference we're in. Big 12 talk on this. Obviously, you can go check out Drake Toll at Locked On Big 12. In the second segment, we're going to talk about how this impacts Houston. But first, I do want to point out that this is all about building the perfect formula for college athletics. And the formula for winning championships is the same kind of formula for building a strong athletic foundation, the same kind of formula that keep your ride or die alive. That's the passion, drive, and patience you need. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for, and the eBay Guaranteed Fit. Your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and not cash. All the parts you need and the prices you want. It's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusion apply. eBay Guarantee Fit is only available to U.S. customers. All right, so a lot of talk in this week and next week at a national level, even at a Big 12 level, about House versus the NCAA and the suit, the Big 12 signing on, right? I think is going to start a snowball effect. Like by Tuesday night, the ACC had already signed on, right? But what does this mean for Houston? How does this impact the Cougars? Okay. I think, first of all, we should point out that the Power Five and Group of Five, within it feels like minutes, will no longer be linked up, right? It, you know, different coaches have joked about it a lot in the last 2 or 3 years since the NIL thing started, but they're just not playing the same level of sports anymore. One is a non-amateur, semi-professional. It's athletic students that go to class, as part of their agreement. One is a more traditional student athlete, right, in the older sense. Those Power Five conferences are the future of college sports. They're moving into a far less amateur model. Houston joined the Big 12 as this thing is getting started, right? There's a real, not so crazy distant alternate timeline out there, right? Where Houston could have been in the American Conference 1 or 2 years too long and left out of this whole thing and never had a shot to get up. It feels like the gulf between the Group of Five and the Power Five will be insurmountable once the Power Five is officially a professional outfit, right? And so missing that boat would have been catastrophic. It just would have been, right? We didn't. We're in the Big 12. That's a good thing. Okay. I will say that starting with things I'm, more worried about, $22 million a year for athletes, while the exact configurations is going to be interesting. That's a lot of profit for athletics for Houston, right? Again, just a Group of Five program a couple years ago, building up revenue streams, relying on that TV money kind of kick in very, very soon. 22 million is going to be a lot to swallow at the start of this thing. Now, is it going to get easier as it goes? I think so. Is Houston going to be prepared for what's down the line? I think so. I think each of those are worth paying attention to. But on the whole, the big worry there is those first couple of years having to find $22 million in the athletic budget to pay college athletes is going to be a stretch at first. Won't be for long, I don't think, but it will be a stretch at first. And then the impact of what that stretch looks like is obviously going to be a big deal. I also would point out, I think that, especially with the work of guys like Landon Gosling and different people, the NIL collectives in Houston are somewhat ironically starting to really get rolling, right? The Run It Back campaign has really worked for men's basketball. I know that Willie Fritz and his staff have really helped promote the kind of things that Link U and football has helped with the football program. And as we're seeing Houston get better at that NIL collective model, it's going to dramatically change. Some reporters are indicating it's going to be gone. I don't know that I quite go that far as I'm reading through this. It looks like to me there's just going to be a lot of rules and regulations on what NIL collectives can and can't do. And effectively, they may change so much they're not recognizable. But I don't know that I'm saying they're going to be gone. If this Power Five sports become more professional, they turn into more like a sponsorship than an NIL deal, right? So you become sponsored by Mattress Mac, not NIL deal with Mattress Mac, right? Or whatever the deal is, right? I do think it, though, for Houston in a negative light, like we're figuring that out as soon as it changes. That means you got to continue to adapt and mold and pivot and so on, right? The ways I think this helps Houston, I think, are getting overlooked. And I don't mean to say that it took me 14 minutes to get to that point. It's probably not great podcasting, but if you made it this far, I think the way that this helps Houston is professionalizing the Power Five is going to add salary caps to those revenue shares, right? That's not just me assuming. That's people like CBS and Ross Dellinger of Yahoo are saying that that's part of the deal here. And that helps Houston because right now, Houston's competing with people that got way more than $22 million to spend. They just do, right? And Houston's kind of building its department, building its program, and not there yet, right? Putting a salary cap on this, well, it's not going to necessarily make everything completely equal with facilities and again those sponsorships or NILs or whatever. What it will do is help like put maxes and caps on what you can pay the athletes, right? We see in the NBA, and for people that follow me on X or Twitter or whatever know I'm a big NBA fan, right? But max salaries have changed up how we look at the sport. For the first time since the 1970s, the NBA will have a sixth consecutive different NBA champion, right? That's no accident. You went from the 2019 Raptors, the 2020 Lakers, 2021 you had the Bucks, 2022 you had the Warriors, 2023 you had the Nuggets, and this year it's going to be one of four teams, none of which has won in the last 5 years, right? In college sport, that and in the NBA they have a flexible cap with max salaries, right? In college sports, right? As you professionalize them, putting a salary cap on things, even if you have taxes above this and whatever, we can see the model work out where you could have a Big 12 school, even if the two athletic departments revenue very differently, have the same kind of payroll. Well, then suddenly, when you're a prospective quarterback or a prospective pass rusher or prospective point guard or whatever, you're not measuring just the dollars and cents because the dollars and cents can't be all that different between the two, right? And so I think that actually helps Houston in a lot of ways. We want Houston kids to stay in Houston. That works out for us, right? It also, all of this and professionalizing things, salary caps and all of it, is good for Houston because in the wild, wild west system we're looking at right now, you've got chaos happening. The LSUs, the Alabamas, the Ole Misses, even the Missouris and different players, Arkansas with big NIL collectives, are just kind of running this thing like the wild, wild west. And in our third segment, talks about Florida and how it's not going too well for them right fast. But I would just point out that wild, wild west, less rules, less regulations, has not worked out so well for Houston. And this offers opportunity to put some clamps on that and kind of slow everyone's roll for a second. Now, in the third and final slide, I want to talk about that wild, wild west a little bit in regards to Florida, Jaden Rashada, and how it impacts Houston in a much different, less direct kind of way. So on Tuesday, one of the bigger college sports headlines across the nation was that Jaden Rashada is suing Billy Napier and NIL people involved with the University of Florida. Now, I should point out that Jaden Rashada originally committed to Florida after having been committed at one point to the University of Miami. He ultimately ended up spending his freshman year at Arizona State after some things fell through on the NIL front, and then ended up transferring to Georgia. So he's at Georgia. It sounds like Kirby Smart may have had to actually sign off on this lawsuit, kind of, which adds a layer to this because Florida and Georgia are both in the SEC East, obviously. But his lawyer is Rusty Hardin for Houstonians paying attention to the law. That's a name that pops up a lot in these kind of big cases. And right now, what you're seeing is not quite a contract claim, but it feels and reads like one in the way you read about this online. It's technically more about fraud and fraudulent things. The next step will likely be discovery because I don't think we're going to have a very quick dismissal in this case. The big thing is to look at the timeline of the events here and what exactly Jaden and his family is alleging happened. So Jaden Rashada initially committed to Miami going into his senior of high school. The June before that, June 2022, a booster from Florida named Hugh Hathcock said he could do whatever it took to get Jaden Rashada to Florida, okay, to decommit and then recommit to Florida. Even offered things like employment to Jaden Rashada's father, right? Like went above and beyond, like, what can we do to get you there? Rashada initially commits to the University of Miami and theoretically is going to get a giant life wallet, funny money, Bitcoin, cryptocurrency kind of deal from John Ruiz, the big donor at the time there, right? Florida director of recruiting reached out to Rashada and his agents, tries to flip him. The life wallet deal in Miami over the course of 4 years was reportedly going to pay about $9.5 million. At Florida, they were offering a deal that reached closer to 13.8. Hathcock, the guy we mentioned that said he'd do whatever it took to get into Florida, big booster, his company and his NIL collective are the two big factors involved in that $13.8 million over 4-year deal. And it sounds like some real traction gets made there. Hathcock pulls out his NIL bit and then actually gets some help from other Florida Gators NIL bits. Rashada ultimately does flip his commitment over the course of his senior football season, and the payments are supposed to start like then, right? Early December comes. He's supposed to get a little bit of a bonus for signing that first paycheck, etc. And suddenly the payments don't come through. And then by December 6th, you actually have Florida donors trying to pull out of paying the deal, right? Ultimately, as signing day, the final signing day approaches for Rashada and the Florida Gators, he gets it says text message in the reporting, which should be pretty easy to prove in court. Rashada gets that from Billy Napier, the head coach of Florida, and also other messages from the same recruiting director from before, that as soon as he signs, he got $1 million be wired to his bank account for missed payments and collections and so on, right? Rashada signs with Florida ahead of signing day, the whole nine. Ultimately, none of the cash ever comes, right? And all of that is to say that I think the Rashada case is fascinating at a national level because we're seeing the NIL's impact on kids in the reverse. We think about the way this is like ruining our sports and our teams, and guys are just taking big dollar amounts, right? You're also seeing haphazardly thrown together deals to try and get kids to change commitments for colleges between rivals like Florida and Miami, ultimately leading to the kids' detriment, right? And I think that this lawsuit is kind of putting a big spotlight on, hey, the Wild Wild West thing is not just impacting the schools, it's impacting the kids because there's no rules and regulation over this. There's apparently some contract that may or may not have been signed, but money wasn't supposed to be passed back and forth. But what I will say is, if this case leads to Billy Napier being found as someone who said this $1 million is coming and then ultimately could not follow through with that, if there's some sort of a legal standing, anything that stands for a contract in court, whether it's an actual contract or what's considered a verbal agreement or whatever, okay, what you're about to see is a lot of things blown up at Florida, right? This could lead to him resigning, getting fired. Again, it feels like there's some blatant NIL things being violated at the very least, even if it's not Billy Napier's text message, and even if it's like at least Florida under his watch is committing some fairly catastrophically large NIL violations, right? And I think it's funny this ultimately happens because they wanted to flip from Miami. They just wanted to not go to a rival, right? Cancel the contract within 24 hours of the first payment being due is pretty crummy too. But let's say Napier and this whole thing goes down in the course of the next 8 months, which I think it could be that fast. I really do. Right? What that means is, that kid DJ Lagway we've talked about before. I assumed that Napier would get fired because Florida's going to stink, and they still might. For what it's worth, they still might. But Lagway from Willis, Texas, Family was buddy with Sean Bell, the recruiter that was recruiting him to Baylor fairly heavily, now on the Houston staff. Willis, notably close to Houston, to say the least. Willis is also a high school that Willie Fritz coached at. He's familiar with the area very much familiar with the area. I can't talk today. But all that is to say that we continue to plug this story, continue to watch the breadcrumbs fall. DJ Lagway, a future pro quarterback, high ranked high school prospect, has not touched the field for a game at Florida yet. He just got there. He's going to have his freshman season this fall. And you're already seeing the world crumble around him in Gainesville. I'm not sure he's the only person that could be looking for a new home come the next transfer portal window, but he's certainly the one I'd keep my eye on. Now, that obviously directly impacts the roster with Houston. One other thing I'd look at as far as how this could impact the Houston Cougars is you see a lot of these, NIL is not supposed to legally be pay for play, but so much of it effectively is, right? You see deals get signed for kids like, hey, post on Instagram that you worked out at this gym, or yeah, you're gonna, wear this brand of socks or whatever, and like all kinds of odd, say on TikTok that you like our brand of fingernail polish or whatever, right? All those different NIL deals are happening all over the place, right? That are fairly minimal, that are really pay for play, right? What's happening here is the moment a kid didn't get his end of the bargain, he ultimately left and never went to Florida. He ultimately went to Arizona State and is now at Georgia, hoping to beat Florida, I'm sure, right? But B, this is a lot of money he's suing for a lot of money, right? He's supposed to be making $13.8 million over the course of 4 years. Looked like it was about $250,000 a month with escalators each year he stayed at Florida. So I guess there's some way this could be, condensed to 12 months of $250,000, because who knows if he actually plays the whole contract, whatever. This is, if this goes Rashada's way, going to change what NIL and sponsorships look like as well, because it's going to suddenly become like, well, the contract in this can no longer be backdoor handshakes, because you can't potentially have yourself opened up to a lawsuit like this. You can't potentially get sued for $13.8 million because you missed a pay deadline that you shook on without any real contract, because there's precedent set that contract was created. Now, that's a lot of legalese on today's show, but I think each of these cases, both House versus NCAA and the Jaden Rashada case, impact Houston moving forward. If you think I'm crazy, you can tell me in the comments down below. I really don't mind. If you want more football-y kinds of things, tomorrow's episode is going to be looking at recruits with one Brian Smith. Folks love Brian, so snaps for Brian when he comes on. We'll have that episode up there tomorrow. We'll see what Friday brings. If more news breaks, we'll break it here at Locked On Cougs each and every day. Locked On Cougs is a proud member of the Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team, our Houston Cougars, every day. Go Cougs.